Life, mental health, rare disease. That's what Never Give Up is all about. This podcast is a companion to my blog, PKUjournal.com. I'm Kevin Alexander, and I've been a professional storyteller for over 20 years. I'm also an adult living with the rare disease phenylketonuria, or PKU. Since 2012, I've been traveling the world advocating for PKU, newborn screening, and rare disease awareness. Living with a rare disease can be a heavy burden. So, on this podcast, I share thoughts, reflections, and stories to motivate you on your journey. My journey to the 2023 ESPKU conference is over. But I'm still thinking about the trip. It's hard to capture an experience like this with words. I don't mean the international travel required to attend the event. That's amazing, don't misunderstand me. I'm beyond grateful for the opportunity. What I think is indescribable is what happens when two people affected by a rare disease sit down and have a conversation. For my previous episode from the conference, I gathered 26 interviews with people from across the world. The United Kingdom, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Austria, Portugal, Italy, North Macedonia, Ireland, Poland, Spain, Germany, Turkey, Lithuania, the Netherlands, and the United States. So that's 27 voices of people affected by PKU, if you include mine. When choosing my interviews, I made geographical diversity my top priority. I realized later that out of the 26 interviews I gathered, 20 of them were with PKU adults. And so, I experienced something deeply personal, something I'll never forget. Over the course of a few days, I had face-to-face conversations with 20 PKU adults from around the world. I grew up in total isolation from the PKU community, so I get emotional thinking about that. But I also gathered interviews with PKU parents and another category of those affected by PKU that we don't talk about very much: partners or spouses. The rare disease life affects everyone in the patient's life, so that includes others like grandparents, siblings, close friends, and so on. But our partners become entrenched in this life, and I think it's time we start listening to them and their perspective on this life. So, in this episode, I'm going to take just a few of the interviews I gathered and spend some more time with them. I knew as we were recording these conversations that I wouldn't be able to include all of them in the previous episode from the conference. That one was called Finding Your Rare Disease Community. And I tried to tell that story in such a way that anyone in the rare disease community could relate to it. But this episode is going to be different. We're going to explore some topics that are specific to the PKU community. But if you're affected by another rare disease, perhaps there are some principles you can extract that might help you in your rare disease life. When I release this episode, nearly a month will have passed since the trip, and my gratitude is without measure or description. This was one of the best experiences of my life, and certainly one of the best experiences I've had in PKU, newborn screening, and rare disease advocacy. One of my goals with these episodes is to remind us all that PKU has no borders, and that we are one global community. Before we continue, I'll remind you that my content from the ESPKU conference was made possible by Ajinomoto Cambrook. I met the founders, Lynn and David Palella, at the beginning of my PKU advocacy journey, and they have been dear friends ever since. I spoke with Lynn in the previous episode I produced from my trip to ESPKU. It's called Finding Your Rare Disease Community, and if you haven't listened to it yet, I recommend that you go listen to it first. Some of the context of this episode depends on your awareness of that episode. I can't say thank you enough to Cambrook Cambrook for making this trip possible. This experience was life-changing for me, and I'll share more of my thoughts about that later on in the episode. For now, I'll just say that industry partners are part of our community because they serve our community, and those I've met in our community care deeply about us. Cambrook, you made these stories possible. Perspectives from all over the world. Thank you. If you'd like to hear more about my experience with Cambrook products, there's a recent article on my blog. I'll link to it in the show notes. And if these episodes mean something to you, if they have enriched your life in any way, please reach out to Cambrook and let them know. Their contact info is also in the show notes. I captured some truly magical moments and stories at the conference, and I will always be grateful for that. But for now, back to the story. There are a few people appearing in this episode whom I met for the first time at this conference, but not Dalibor. We first met years ago at a National PKU Alliance conference here in the US. We don't have many guests from Croatia at those conferences, so I certainly remembered meeting him. Our paths crossed again at the 2015 ESPKU conference in Berlin, but this year we had a chance to sit down and have a proper conversation. We were invited to speak on one of the PKU adult panel discussions, along with our friends Mark and Marketa, both of whom you heard from in the previous episode. You'll hear more from Marketa later on in this one. We sat down as a group the night before the event with our moderator Sarah to review what we wanted to discuss during the panel. And immediately, I felt confident that it would be a great discussion. Because despite our different cultural and geographic backgrounds, we are united in our perspective of PKU from one who has it. I'm constantly amazed at how adults with PKU can immediately understand one another because of our shared experience, no matter where we come from in the world. So when I sat down with Dalibor, we began our conversation with our thoughts on how that panel discussion turned out. We were on the adults panel together with some of our other friends. How do you think that went, and what do you think were some of the important things we talked about?
I think that went, first of all, really good. The questions that we have been asked were relevant to the audience that was present here at the conference. In terms of the importance and relevance, I think the topics of growing old with PKU and what we expect as PKUers is something many stakeholders in our lives need to address, not only the patients themselves, but also the industry and the science. I think that's been a really good discussion into the future of PKU, what we expect from it.
Yeah, I mean, we're all roughly the same age, but we're all concerned about the idea of those we know who are older already, but also what's going to happen with us as we age. What were your thoughts about that?
It's twofold, to be honest. It's twofold. First of all, I don't think the system right now is ready for PKUers who are getting old right now, because there's no infrastructure in place, what I've seen so far, that could help the PKUers to be taken care of. So knowledgeable staff that knows what to do when the Phe levels go high, when they go up, order the products that they need, and manage their diet. So that is one thing. And the other thing is, what worries me right now is what are the effects of the blood Phe levels that we have long term on other organs, like heart, lungs, for example, or even brain as well, in terms of Alzheimer's and dementia and whatever other brain disorders people can have at that age.
What does it mean to you to be in Birmingham, where the treatment for PKU was first developed? And they had this presentation at the beginning about Sheila Jones and that story of how the treatment was developed here. Have you thought about that while you've been here?
Yeah, I mean, being here in Birmingham, where the treatment of PKU was developed by Dr. Hans Bickel when he visited Birmingham for a couple of years, I believe, is actually the beginning of our lives that we know, and the treatment that we know currently. I think the future is bright in terms of treatment available so that not everybody needs to stick to the diet if it doesn't work for him.
How has connecting with your rare disease community changed your life?
It changed my life in a very, very positive way. I haven't been connected with my PKU association in Croatia for 25 years. And then after I graduated, I got involved into the association. I went to my first summer camp ever, and my feel levels were out of control before that, for the reason that I just didn't know how to feel full and maintain them within the range. I was always thinking I need to be hungry. I mean, I will be hungry if I keep eating low protein. I never dropped the diet. I was always on a protein substitute and on low protein food. But it was just things that I was eating on the side that were too much. And then at the age of 25, when I joined the association, for the first time in my life, I understood that I can feel full while keeping my phenylalanine levels within the range or below the highest limit. And I felt really good. And I noticed that I wasn't the only one struggling with the diet and struggling with PKU. There were a bunch of more people doing this, struggling with the same thing. And that feeling of not being alone has opened my eyes. And after that, my feel levels didn't go that way up anymore. So that was 13 years ago.
So you think being connected with your community helps you stay motivated in your day-to-day treatment?
Yes, definitely.
Also on that PKU Adults panel was my friend Marketa. She's from the Czech Republic, and we also met at the 2015 conference in Berlin. But like with Dalibor, we met at the conference, became friends on social media, but didn't have a chance to talk much since then. But there's one moment I'll always remember from our panel discussion this year. We were having a great conversation, sharing our perspectives, but then Marketa took it to another level. When she opened up, was willing to be vulnerable, and shared some personal experiences with all of us. I looked out to see how the audience was responding, and I could tell they were listening intently. I already planned to interview her for the main episode, but after hearing her speak, I knew I wanted to spend some time chatting with her, and you'll hear why. She has some valuable insight and opinions about issues affecting adults with PKU. We spoke together on one of the adults panels with two of our other friends. And how do you think that went, and what do you think were some of the important things we talked about?
I think it went really well, actually. We had some nice feedback after, which is amazing. And basically, we talked about how it is being adult with PKU, so a little bit about the challenges that we had in life with the diet and everything. And then we talked about a little bit about like traveling with PKU, because all of us are living abroad or traveling a lot, and it's not that easy with PKU. And we also talked about mental health, which is a really big topic that is just starting to crawl out, kind of. I think it was really interesting also to see after the people who came and just were so thankful that we opened this topic. And to me, it was really great to have that kind of feedback, because mental health, for us anyway, as we are adults, the first adults with PKU that treated early, we are kind of like new to it. We are the first ones who have to deal with it. And we don't really know. We don't even know our future, to be fair, which is kind of frustrating, but don't think about it. I feel like, and apparently it's not just me, because I got a lot of feedback after our panel, that unless a woman wants to have a child, like, or expecting a child, she's not really cared for. And like, I don't mean it in a bad way, but like, there's so much attention when that is happening. If, for example, you don't want to have a child, or actually you just had a child, the care stops, or you don't get it at all, which is just really wrong, because in your life, you get through so much. And it might be different things. It might be you have a very difficult time at home. You have something at work, like a promotion that you really need to get sorted for that because you need to improve on so many levels. And it can be so many other things that you need support. You actually need a real support and help with your diet to make sure that you can go through it. And there is not even option for that. So you have some important thing in your life you need a support for, which mine is coming up right now, that I would really love to feel supported because I'm gonna get promotion that I need to learn a lot of things, and I need to, for 5 months, it's a period of 5 months that I have to really get into it. And I feel like there's gonna be a lot of stress and everything. And I would love to get my diet like really well sorted for that time, because if not, that's gonna just make things worse, and I'm not sure I will be able to do that. So for me, it feels like the quality of life as a woman, as an individual, I'm not sure how the men have it, so I cannot talk for them. But for me, it feels like unless I'm planning on having a child, nobody really cares about quality of my life as an individual, which is really not right. So we are kind of realizing how much the PKU can influence our mental health, and the other way around as well, because it's not just that because of PKU we might be having more anxiety or depression, but it's the other way around as well, because when we feel these things, or maybe something else as well, the diet is probably not that great. So but nobody really talks about it because it's not a comfortable topic, and people are probably either like ashamed of it or just don't want to talk openly, which I can understand. It's not when you put yourself out there like that, it's a big thing. It's not for everybody.
The way that I've always looked at it is the way that I deal with the mental health side of things is by reaching out and engaging in community. So how has this community been a huge part of your life, and how has it changed your life in some way?
So for me, it is really the major part of motivation and giving me kind of strength to go through the year, because this event is every year, and I've been going for many years actually. And it is not really easy, because when you're back in your home and you don't really have anybody around you to understand what you go through, it's nice once a year that you actually have the people and you can talk and you can see like, okay, what I was feeling or what I went through, it's actually something that I'm not alone in, which is an amazing thing to know. So for me, these conferences, these meetings and the socializing with other PKU patients, it's really important for me. It helps me to keep the diet on. It helps me to stay positive and optimistic, even though sometimes it's not really easy. But I was lucky enough to actually be a part of the society since I was little. I have a really, really good friend, one of my best friends who had the same disease, still has, of course, and she lives very close to my place, my city in Czech Republic. So that was really, really amazing thing for me to have as a child. And if anybody has the possibility to, connect with another family for the child, I would definitely suggest that. And I think the meeting of adults anyway, at this point, it's so important. Just to exchange the things they go through and try to figure out the way to include each other in their lives, kind of in a way, so they can help each other as well. Not only it can be across border, it can be across the whole globe. It doesn't matter really. It's just that it's nice to have a kind of support there, isn't it?
Meeting people in the rare disease community is my favorite thing in the world. And naturally, I always feel the closest to those affected by PKU. And as with Dalibor, Marketa, and our friend Mark, who was also on the panel, when I meet another adult with PKU, it often feels like we've been friends forever. That's certainly the case with the next person we'll spend some time with. I first met Richard through an Instagram chat group. It's made up exclusively of those who have PKU from across the world. Richard is from the United Kingdom, and we got along well in our chats about PKU. Then, he caught my eye because of our shared interest in fitness. Now, I can't say I exercise as much as I'd like or should, and certainly not as much as Richard. His Instagram profile is all about PKU and fitness. And then, when we met up in Birmingham, we instantly connected in a more personal way. The one challenge about producing the last episode, 26 interviews in just a few days, is a lot to get done. So, all throughout the event, I was running from one interview to the next. But then, I'd slow down, look around, and there was Richard. So, we'd have a conversation. When it came time to record his interview, I felt like we'd been friends for years. He shared some personal insights and experiences with me that I knew I wanted to explore further. So I know a little bit about your story, which is similar to mine in that you spent most of your life not really connected to anyone in the community, and then you started connecting. Tell me a little bit about, how did that happen for you? What was it that was kind of like the event that caused you to get connected?
Yeah, of course. I explored more in terms of my fitness and health, really. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer and testicular cancer. So for me, that was life-changing. It enabled me to kind of revisit my priorities, family, health, and really start to focus on some of the stuff that I was doing. And I knew that it would have to start with PKU first. So for me, it was about contacting dietitians, contacting the professionals that were there to ask questions, to do things better, which I did. And then over time, I focused more on health, more on sports, more on my own fitness. And it got to a point where there was limitation, there was limits in the type of information that they could share. So I started seeking it out in the community. And by doing that, I just put myself out there. And what I was doing. And as a result of that, I was connecting with people who had similar interests, similar ambitions and aims and goals, but also had questions too. So it was a learning process for me, really. And that's continued, which is awesome. You had that event where you not connected to the community, now you're connected. And now, let's talk about this weekend in particular. You are experiencing the ESPKU conference for the very first time. It's your first big PKU event. Tell me a little bit about that. Yeah, unique. What a unique experience, huh? I've spent a life isolated away, but doing things okay and have that pillar of strength that I needed to get through, which had come from my family. But coming to a place like this, where there's so many individuals from across the world and hearing so many different stories of their backgrounds, but also learning from presentations and professionals as well, it's ginormous. You made a comment in a message to me, in a group as well. You said there was your life before and the life after advocacy. And it's done that for me, actually, 100%. It's kind of enabled me to see what my life can be with it all included. So the amount of strength you get from other people to be included in that is ginormous. So it's kind of empowered me a little bit more. I felt like I was empowered anyway because I had so many people following me and so many people messaging me. That in itself, I got lots of strength from that. But actually to get a face-to-face interaction with so many people, the strength comes from that is huge. And I'm sure you know of that as well. So I'm leaving here with more strength and more empowered and to do more and be active more and engage more, which I think is probably, for me, the most perfect outcome that could have happened. I've been asking most people here, about this life can be a burden sometimes, living with PKU. And then when you're involved in advocacy, you're involved in social media, and you're putting yourself out there in the PKU community, that can be a weight and a burden as well. What has that experience been like for you, and how do you maintain a balance and good emotional and mental health? Yeah, well, I guess because I've done it digitally on social media platforms, in some respects I've been exposed to it, but also there's maybe an element of separation there because of the barrier of not being able to meet these people face to face. It has been hard. There's been stories that I've learnt in countries where diagnosis doesn't take place, and those individuals have been attempting to seek information from me, and maybe I've tried to help as best as I can, and in order to take that in, there's an emotional context there. You can carry that baggage a little bit as well. But I guess this is a new venture for me, yeah? This is kind of more face-to-face, so maybe I'm going to be exposed to this more the more I engage, and especially if I go to more European conferences across the European continent. So, ask me that question in the future. For me, I need to focus on me. I need to focus on my health. I need to focus on my care. And it's been proven that for me, once I put myself in a good position, I'm able to be strong for other people. And then when I look back, I think that's what my parents did for me, probably at the sacrifice of maybe at times at their mental health. But for them, their situation was different. They were isolated, completely away from the community. So I'm hoping that I'll be exposed to the community, learn more, learn about the hardships that other people are facing too, try to help if I can, if I'm able, if my story helps at all, but also maybe get strength from others as well. So I think it's a combination. I think it's just self-care and being strong for other people and myself as well.
You make a really good point that makes me think about something. So many times in this community, we look to the rare disease and PKU parents that are very visible and vocal and out there, and they're organizing events, and we look at them and we see them as heroes in our community, and they 100% are. But for every single one of them, there's somebody else who their entire focus and energy is on taking care of their children, and they're changing their children's lives. And all of that is impacting all of us. Last question I have for you is, now that you're in this community, and you're not isolated anymore, when I ask you, what does the PKU community mean to you, what do you think?
Support. That's how I see it. Positivity. I think support and positivity, that's how I see it. Support, strength, positivity, and inclusive. And I think being separated for so long and not having access to that, I think that's a real positive for me to take away.
Okay, I lied. One more question. Yeah. Let's just say that there's someone who's listening to this, the podcast is for the broader rare disease community. So let's say there's someone who, maybe there's not enough people who have their rare disease for them to really ever meet them in person, like face-to-face, or even on social media. There's not many of them, but they want to maybe meet others who are affected by a rare disease. Why do you think it's important to have human connection, even if it's somebody that may not share all of your experiences?
Yeah, I'm sure there's diseases out there where it's tougher for them to meet, right? But there's commonality, I think, in diseases in general, and how vulnerable that can make us, and the burden that comes along with living with that, as well as the burden on their support network and their family as well. I think it's just looking after yourself, ensuring that you build relationships in your local network that have people that are there for you in a positive way and see your value, and maybe getting strength from those as well. But I think actively just seeking out from the wider internet community. When I was younger, these platforms didn't exist. There wasn't a Google search. There wasn't platforms such as social media platforms. So even if it's just crossing to different rare diseases, if it's PKU or a different form, the burden is there for all of us. We live that life. So I'm sure that though we may have different rare diseases, we can connect in different ways, and we can learn from each other and how we cope with that.
During one of the sessions, I heard someone share their story about being the mother of a child who did not receive newborn screening and was diagnosed with PKU later on. Then I realized we were connected on Instagram, and so when I interviewed Sophia, I knew I wanted to document her experience. She's from North Macedonia, and her story sounds just like one I told years ago about a girl born in Mexico. That film is called For Katie. It's on my website, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It tells Katie's story of a late diagnosis because newborn screening wasn't mandatory in her country. And now, 10 years later, I heard the same story about Sophia's son from North Macedonia. And recently, a group of people from Georgia, the country, not the US state, have reached out to me on social media with similar stories. Late diagnosis of PKU due to lack of newborn screening. And so, I spent a lot of time talking with Sophia, listening to her story, and once again being amazed at the fierceness of rare disease parents. You shared a little bit of your story in one of the panels earlier. I want to ask you first about what it means for you to connect with the rare disease community, and I'd like for you to share part of that if you're willing to.
As I said at the panel, in our country we don't have the metabolic screening yet as a mandatory test. So my son also was late discovered at 20 months. And also the health system and the doctors are not so interested in cooperation and helping with all the problems that we cope with. So the first information that I got were actually through the social media from the PKU families and the parents, because I didn't know anything about PKU. I've heard first time for PKU for phenylketonuria when we got the diagnosis in a hospital hall, and no one was interested to explain something more. So me and my family started searching a lot of stuff through internet, and we found PKU groups on Facebook. Firstly, some of the parents called us to explain how all the things are going and what he should be eating. Even when we got a wrong calculated formula at the hospital, one of the mothers from Serbia called me to teach me how to calculate the formula. So for us, it was a really big deal because we don't have nearly anything in Macedonia for PKU. The experience that the doctors have also it's really small, and we only have officially 20 patients, which probably there's a lot more that are not diagnosed. So everything that I learned was through internet, through the PKU community. Even I learned for ESPKU through Facebook and groups.
The burden of living with this lifestyle can be heavy. So how do you keep going?
It is heavy, especially because he is a late diagnosed. So even though he has a big success in the development, and now he's a first grader in a normal school, and I'm really happy about it. Your life is like changed, and everything that you do during the days for the kids and for him especially. All the food, all the diets, all the recipes and everything. So another burden is the financial aspect, because, you're giving a lot of money. We also don't have any support from the state, from the government. We buy everything by ourselves. We don't have food. We only have the formula, which is going through the state and through the health system. I have some hard days. I have some hard moments when I want to scream and cry. But, I don't have time for that. I don't have time, and I have the desire to help to every other patient that will be diagnosed in our country, and to give all the knowledge and information that I have so they don't have to go through everything that I went.
One of my passion projects in advocacy is newborn screening. In the United States and around the world, there's a lot of talk about improving newborn screening. Patients and families who receive newborn screening, they're thankful for newborn screening, but they had one experience with newborn screening, and your experience is different. What would you want to say to people about why it's so important for our community, for the PKU community, to keep talking about newborn screening?
We had a different story, a pretty difficult one for me as a parent, as a mother, and I was accusing myself even in the start that it's my fault, or did I do anything wrong, Is it my fault that we are living in a country where we don't have the screening? So it is important, especially for me and I guess for other mothers, that they don't have the screening in their countries, because a patient with a PKU that is diagnosed on time will have normal life, let's say normal, in comparison with our life now, which is totally different, and all other opportunities about as a mother who wants to work, and don't have the time. So it's really important, and it's painful, to keep pushing and to keep fighting for something that should be normal to happen in a state that is trying to go to the EU, When you have the possibility to be born and to have all those screenings, so you can continue with your life normally and be healthy, and then you have your son at home who didn't have that opportunity and that chance, and now you're coping with everything, and you're asking yourself, will he be able to live by himself when I get older, and will he be able to get a job or finish the school and everything? And for maybe not. I hope that he will finish the school and he will be able to work and everything. But you're always asking yourself, why should it be like that? Why can't things be different? And why can't you have a normal life? It's nothing more than that, a normal, healthy life.
What can people who are in the PKU community specifically do, if they're active on social media or whatever? What would you want them to do to help raise awareness about PKU issues in countries like yours where the treatment and the screening is different? What can all of us do?
Maybe to be a little bit louder about the countries that then don't have the metabolic screening yet, and maybe the ESPKU as an organization to find a way to communicate with the governments or the ministries of health or something, just to remind them that they're here and we are in the country that we don't have the metabolic screening. So together we can push from both sides to make some things happen. Maybe someone will hear us.
The next conversation I'll share with you is with Carolina. She's from Lithuania, and we met in Birmingham the day before this interview. We met in passing while walking through the lobby of the conference center. I asked if I could interview her the following day, but I didn't get a chance to talk with her more than that. So, my plan was to ask her the questions I was going to ask everyone else. We only spoke for a few minutes during this interview, but during those few minutes, I learned very quickly that I like her outlook on PKU and rare disease life because she reminded me that we are one global community. What does it mean for you to be in Birmingham where PKU treatment was first developed?
I actually haven't thought about it before coming, but when I was listening to Sheila's story, I actually started to, the tears started to build up, and I think it's special. Yeah, it's kind of special to be in here, to be in the place where everything started, so it's very special to be here.
How has connecting with the PK community changed your life?
For all my life, I had some people. My mom, she connected with people from my city, with other moms. But I always felt like, I'm alone, I'm different, I'm not as good as others and so on. And then we started to do the camps in Lithuania, all the things. We had our association, and you start to feel like you belong somewhere, because you drink your medicine, your formula together. You all discuss, the things that you eat and so on. So you just start to feel like you belong, like you have a community, you have a family. So I think you belong somewhere. You have people that are going through the same thing as you and who have the same problems or little, winnings or something like that, so.
Last question is, there are times when living with PKU or any rare disease can be difficult. So what do you do to try to maintain a healthy attitude and to cope with it?
We have a chat. Me and some other patients that are my age, we are together for our whole lives, and we just have a chat. We write, okay, I just took my blood, and I just got the result and it's not good, and they are, yeah, mine are not good too. Maybe it's the moon or something, that everything is like that. We talk. We call our director of our association, Dele. She's amazing. We just call to her, and we don't have medicine. We are out of food. We don't know how to make something. We don't know anything. We just call her. She will give the contact, she will answer the question, she will do everything, We call each other. We call other moms, maybe my mom, some people's moms, who have PKU too. We just contact, we communicate all the time.
How important do you think it is? So we have PKU, but let's say someone listening has a different rare disease. They can still reach out to other people maybe that are affected by something else. How important do you think it is for us to try to talk with each other, to connect with other people living with rare diseases? Maybe it's the same one, maybe it's a different one, but you talk about the importance of human connection. How important is that?
it's very important. I don't know, phenylketonuria, it's such a small part of everything that is there, in the world. And it's like, I think it's the same as, like there is a country, we with phenylketonuria, we are a small country. And other diseases, they are other small countries, and we need to work together, to cooperate, to be together as one, because we are one world, and we just need to do that.
On the last day of the conference this year, I didn't get to attend many of the sessions because I was running around that day recording interviews for the podcast. That was the day I recorded 17 interviews. It was a long day. But I did get to attend one session that day for PKU adults. And I met another man named Richard, also from the UK. Richard has PKU, and so does his older brother Duncan. I've met many people with PKU whose siblings also have it. But while talking with Richard, I realized that I had never captured that perspective in a story. It's always been through private conversations with friends or others I've met at PKU events. So, when Richard and I sat down for our conversation, I knew our topic. I was curious to know what it's like when you're growing up, to have someone else in the house who knows exactly what you're dealing with.
So for me, it's slightly different. I have an older brother with PKU. So I've always known someone else with PKU, which makes it a little bit different to other people that are a bit more isolated. But also my parents were very involved in the community in the early days, even though there might have been some opposition to that initially in the UK. They kind of went through that and created support groups, and we always went to events. So even though I always had my brother there, we also were well connected early on. So I was born in 1972. The first NSPKU meeting was 1973, I think. So it was literally a year after I was born that they started it. And I think we could count for the first 15 years where we'd maybe missed one conference, an annual conference. So that meant every year we had that kind of community element. And there's some people now I can even recognise from back there that I haven't seen for 10 years. Like, for example, I caught up with a PKU friend this time that I hadn't seen for about 8-9 years. But it's still that sense of community where we were sharing stories and things like that, which is really important and really valuable, I find.
I personally think that it's hard for people outside of our community to understand that relationship we all feel. Mm-hmm. Because for anyone, and it's true of anyone in our community, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the conversations that we've had this week have been about from the adults with PKU perspective of varying ages, whether it's older adults, younger adults, whatever. There is a common shared experience that we have that as much as people in this community who are strongest supporters, who have advocated for us for their entire lives, for our entire lives, we're the only ones that can 100% understand what it's like to live with PKU day by day. Yeah. Talk to me about why that topic is so important to you and why PKU adults, that we're just so drawn to each other.
Yeah, I think it's that knowing that actually talking to someone who can understand the day-to-day elements, because it's one thing having a bit of empathy of someone outside looking in, but when you know that someone's gone through those same experiences, it means that you start opening up more, you share more as well, because you know that they have the same experiences, or and sharing that. And I've done that quite a few times where I've started conversations and we go very top level initially, and then the longer that we talk to each other, we go quite deeper in terms of what the PKU means in the workplace, how the challenges that we get from a day-to-day, even how much you start to share. I mean, I always took feedback from people that I met about how much do you actually, when you first get a new job, how much do you actually share about having the PKU? Because outsiders looking in, they don't understand the same challenges. And even that topic was quite a useful and powerful one when I used to meet up with people and friends. So,
in your experience living in the UK, and maybe this applies to others living elsewhere in Europe or even in the United States or elsewhere in the world, what do you think are the things that we need as PKU adults to be focused on going forward?
So I think definitely the ability to keep on learning about new treatments, because it moves all the time. Like even when I took a break of going to events and things for a couple of years, there was changes in terms of the progression. So things like gene therapy moving on, things like PEG-PAL, things like BH4 treatment, and now there's kind of new variants of that are kind of even learned in this weekend. So I think that's part of the topic, but it's then how it then relates to specific challenges that PKU adults have. So I mentioned the kind of workplace before. How can you actually look at improving elements of your own performance at work that potentially could be related to PKU? And it's a bit of a balance, because you can't, it's some part of that is to do with your own character generally as a person. It's not all related to PKU, but then there's things that you might learn about PKU that can help you kind of manage some of those levels. So concentration. I mean, one thing that did come out quite a bit when I was talking to other people in the community was also around the ability to plan and execute plans and also be more organised. And actually that's a trait I'm not so good at, and that might be because of PKU. It may just be a character thing, but just having the access to that new research that tells you elements like that allows you to be a bit more equipped to go back to work and be a bit more performing.
We've had many opportunities for adults to gather and talk, and when we talk to each other on a level that I think it's different from so many in our community. It's probably but it's similar to the way many maybe parents with children with PKU might get together and they immediately understand one another. And it's true for us who have PKU, who live with PKU. So we've had opportunities to talk, and the one thing that I've found in all of my different conversations, whether it's in a group setting or it's in an individual setting, is that we are all concerned about mental health.
Yes. Yeah.
So what is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always been trying to make sure that I'm as positive as possible, just generally as a person. But that doesn't mean that I don't recognise the elements that can affect things like mental health and things, but also the pressure of, knowing that there's always behind you when you're trying to perform at work. You're always second guessing yourself as well in terms of that. Is there some kind of impact on PKU that's done it? And that affects your mental health, your moods, that kind of thing as well. And certainly the burden of diet, which has always been something that people have kind of said, Diet for Life is the only treatment, but actually that is a burden in its own right. So some people, if they're just looking at the metrics and they're not looking at the underlying moods and kind of motivations that people have in terms of their mental health, they're missing a whole chunk of things. And that's why I was saying in some of the sessions this weekend that actually the metrics are one thing, but it's everyone's individual experience that they need to get down to. So I think that's something in terms of mental health. It's certainly got a lot more notice. When we were young in the 70s, there was absolutely no regard for that. It was just, and especially there's a bit of a British mentality anyway of stiff upper lip. Don't talk about things if things aren't going well. And I have a little bit of that just given the background that I've had and the age that I'm at. But I recognise the elements that can affect that kind of mental health element. But I still generally anyway, even day to day without PKU, people say I'm quite a positive element at work. They even people at work say that I handle pressure quite well, that I don't get too flustered in certain situations. I work in quite a high pressure job. So anyway, that might be more my character. And then that kind of shows through in terms of the way I deal with PKU as well. But, it's certainly something when I talk to other younger adults as well, and the burden that they have from the Diet for Life, going out, socialising with friends, how much do they tell, how much do they keep to themselves, all that has a build-up in terms of the mental health, which is really important and needs more kind of understanding as well, and taking into consideration when you're looking at personal treatment plans, because that's really what you need. So, and actually the benefit of having a potential psychologist in at least the yearly appointments, I think would be really beneficial.
There are many perspectives in the PKU community, and over the years I've tried to be as inclusive as possible in my stories. Obviously, there is the person who has it, whether that's a young child, teen, or adult. And then there's the parent. Those have been the main perspectives we've focused on all these years, at least in my experience. But Tobias from Germany is a great example of someone with another perspective we need to explore. His wife has PKU, and recently I've been thinking a lot about his perspective as a spouse or partner. For those like me who have PKU, it becomes our normal experience. It's all that we know. But when we meet someone and let them into our lives, they become part of this rare disease life as well. It becomes central to their experience as they help us navigate our way through this unique life. Tobias is the secretary of the ESPKU, and in the previous episode from the conference, I spoke to him in his official capacity as a representative of the organization. But in this conversation, we'll discuss more about his perspective of this PKU life. And because of his official role, he sees this life from many perspectives.
In your case, because you're a spouse of someone with PKU, you became part of this community. How has that changed things for you as far as, marrying into a bigger family, basically?
It was quite remarkable. A few days after we met first and we started dating, and she explained to me what PKU is and how that impacts her life, I couldn't really understand because, nobody knows PKU. What is that? It's a rare disease. I couldn't really not understand. So I asked her a question at one stage and I said, what if somebody has a problem with you having PKU? And that was the moment when she really catched me, because she answered, you said it right. Somebody has a problem, not me. And that was an attitude that I, in these days, as well as today, like very much, when somebody can speak up self-confident, can take the lead, and can take charge of his own or her own life. Unfortunately, that is with my wife. But this is not the case with so many PKUers who have to face so many obstacles and do not really feel having a place in life. They think they need to justify for something that they are not guilty for. They avoid to give a platform where they can be bullied. They feel ashamed when their peers have to look for places where they can go out for eat, and always is that for you? Is there something available for you? They always feel to be in the center, but they do not want to be in the center. They just want to live a normal life. And that is something that I learned when Christine took me very early to the very first conference. And I saw all these people with different attitudes and different skills. And I saw people that really came across like, wow, this is a conference, this is a meeting. Here we do not need to justify. Here are friends, here's family. These are the people who understand me. And there were not just people with PKU, there were also people in Germany. The PKU Association also covers allied disorders like MSUD, tyrosinemia, MMA, and so on. And they all came together and they all had an unspoken understanding. They didn't need to justify, they didn't need to explain. And that is why they feel so great at these conferences. And I thought, wow, that's a great community. I want to be part of that. I want to join that. And so effectively it started off. I was just a member. I became a member of the German PKU Association to enjoy the community. I was very impressed about these people, effectively.
There's so many different perspectives in our community. And like in your case, because you're able to kind of take a step back and you're able to look at different situations because from a little bit of a neutral perspective, because of the traveling I've done, I've interviewed so many different people from different backgrounds in the community. And when you said something else just now, it really struck a note with me of, people often think that there's only like one role for them in a community. Like when you were talking about your spouse and she was like, well, that's not me. She was accepting the fact that she has a role to play in her life and her community, and what that idea presented to her wasn't the role for her, but it was appropriate for you. And I think many times people, I know back home in the United States, conversations I've had are that people feel like, oh, I can't be involved in the community because I'm not a public-facing advocate. I don't speak, anything like that. And they discount their value, frankly, as a person, because there's a difference between what a person can do for this world versus who they are. And I'm a firm believer that people can find their role no matter what that may be. And if it's for them, it's more of a private matter, and they only talk about it with trusted friends, that's perfectly fine. That's your role in life. If it's someone else who wants to be a public-facing advocate, that's fine. That's your role in life. What would you say to encourage people that they're on their PKU journey, they're on a rare disease journey? It's important to find your place in the community and not worry about what someone else might think your role might be.
Quite simple. It is a community. And a community means they are not just those who are on the stage and in the spotlight. These people do not speak for themselves. Well, effectively, yes, they do, but way beyond that, they speak for the community. So that means the community needs to engage every individual patient, every individual family member, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, grandparents, parents. Everybody has to engage, and they really have to. They have to do that because it's important for their life as well. It is, even if they do not want to be in the spotlight and they do not feel the right person, the right face to be for such an interview or having a lecture on a stage in front of 450 people at an ESPKU conference in Birmingham, if I go there and have a speech, I need the feedback. I need the feeding from the stories, from our members, from the individuals. And that's very important for me. I used to go back to the conferences and meetings with the patients. I need to discuss with them. I give them brain food. I give them something to answer me. And it's my role to listen and to translate. But that's the same within politics. We can blame governments for not doing properly. But if we don't tell them what we need, how should they know? And it's the same within a very small community like the PKU or the rare disease community. That doesn't just belong to PKU. That's the same, I believe, for any rare disease. If we want to make our voices heard, we must share our stories. And everyone is important. Every story is important. There is no one who is less important than the other one. And that is probably the opposite of what they experience in their daily life. Because when they, for example, go to the metabolic clinic or to a doctor, everybody is about the patient. But what about the family? If they go to school and they need nutrition in school and the teachers and the school staff is overwhelmed and cannot handle it, they feel neglected. So they go back into their own bubble and they become shy and say, okay, I better shouldn't tell. But exactly is what we need to avoid. To change that situation, we must speak up. And that's what associations are for, to be the voice of those who are affected. Let me just try to encourage you, if you are listening as a member of this community, as a part of this community, if you feel that your perspective is neglected, that it is not seen, that it is not visible, put your name forward. It doesn't need necessarily to be a position in the executive committee, but it may be a position close to the executive committee, something like an advisor, to share your perspective. If you want to hear your perspective and if you want to see it represented, speak up, take your role. It's a fair deal, and you do not need to go on the stage, but you can help tremendous amounts of work in the background. That's so important. It's not only those few people on the stages that make a community work. This ESPKU conference probably has had something like 40 people working on it. You may have seen 10. The other 30s have done the work in the background. Very important people, VIPs.
In my travels, I've met many people who are kindred spirits and have become dear friends. Bernadette is certainly one of them. She's from Ireland, and when we met in Berlin, her daughter was still young. She told me how much my film, My PKU Life, meant to her, and I told her how much hearing that means to me. I've heard it many times over the years, even recently at this year's conference, and every time I get emotional. Whoever is listening to this, wherever you're from, if you and I have ever had a chat on social media, maybe we've met in person at a conference, or maybe you've become one of my friends, please let me take a moment and say how much you mean to me. I explore the power of human connection in our rare disease experience because it's something I think about all the time. I grew up completely isolated from the PKU community. I didn't meet another family until I was in my early 30s. And then, this whole new world opened up to me because of my film, My PKU Life. And so, when I hear people tell me how much that film means to them, or even my other work as an advocate, I might keep it all inside in the moment. But the truth is, I get very emotional thinking about that, because meeting all of you changed my life forever. It set me on a new path and gave me a new mission in life. I may be a writer and a communicator, but I will never find the words to express how much that means to me. I get emotional about this because of something Bernadette and I spoke about. When you get involved in advocacy, it can have a profound emotional impact on you. Bernadette has become an amazing advocate for PKU and rare diseases. In 2022, she gave a TED Talk about PKU and rare disease advocacy. It went viral in our PKU community, so perhaps you've already seen it. But if not, I'll link to it in the show notes. And so, when I sat down with Bernadette, I wanted to speak with her about advocacy, how it can affect you emotionally, and the importance of self-care. Because what many of us feel, but don't say often, is that with PKU, newborn screening, or rare disease advocacy, even though it can be amazing, there is a cost.
Bernadette, one of the things we've talked about a lot this weekend is that, you and I are both very involved in advocacy. And it's hard for us to explain this to people who maybe are living their rare disease life and they're not super involved in advocacy. But when you are involved, sometimes it can be very emotionally draining. There's actually a podcast I listen to. It's called Caffeinated Caregivers. And it's a lighthearted thing because they talk about coffee, but they're caregivers, and they revolutionized something for me because they talked about how they have a very inclusive view of caregiving, that parents aren't just caregivers, that you can have other roles in life where you're a caregiver. And I started thinking about how being an advocate is a form of caregiving and being a caregiver in a different way, because you're no longer caring for, like in your case, you have a child with PKU, but advocacy work is about more than that. You're doing it because of your daughter, but it's also about you giving back to the world in a different way. But it can take its toll. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, have a conversation about that. How do you keep doing what you're doing?
Okay, it's really hard. And one of the things that enables me to keep doing what I'm doing is stepping back. Every now and again, just pausing and picking my battles and just seeing where I can actually be effective and support advocacy in PKU. It is very, very challenging, and emotionally it is very difficult, I think, because for parents particularly, and I think about moms because I am a mom, and for moms I think it starts with yourself. When you're an advocate, you need to advocate for yourself first, and you need to validate your own feelings around PKU and your relationship with PKU. And that awareness of self really helps to enable you to understand the perspective of others a little bit better. I think if everybody, as an advocate, practiced self-awareness and understood their own motivations, that relationships and communication within advocacy would work so much better, and it would strengthen people to work together. We have an expression in Ireland, Ní Nart go Cur le Chéile. It means strength and unity. And I think sometimes if perspectives are very different, it can cause friction and it can make things difficult within advocacy. when in fact everybody has a role to play. But they can only play that role if they are aware of who they are.
I spoke on one of the adults with PKU panels, and I shared a perspective of one of my friends back in the U.S. who, again, I've only known on social media. We haven't met in person yet. In the last year or so, I have made an effort to reach out and engage with people in the wider rare disease community. It's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because it's not just about issues affecting PKU. There's so much about this lifestyle that is universal to anyone living with a rare disease, especially that mental health component. And a friend of mine that I met, Effie Parks, is the host of this podcast, Once Upon a Gene. And she said something that has just revolutionized the way that I think, and that is community is a form of treatment. And I shared that in our talk the other day because this whole mental health component that we're talking about now with advocacy, for me, what I have found is having that sense of community is one of the ways that I get through it when advocacy is tough. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's times that as advocates we put ourselves out there in front of the world and we're public facing, and then we might go through periods. I went through a period of 2 years when I stepped back from advocacy and was silent and didn't say anything and do anything. And honestly, at the time, I thought I was done. I thought I was done with advocacy. I told my story, my role, it was over. But what I didn't have during that time were individuals that I could reach out to on a personal basis as friends, mm-hmm. who could help me, or that I could just talk to or have things to talk about living with PKU. And so I had spent almost 10 years of my life as a PKU advocate, but then I had no personal support system. Mm-hmm. And that was very difficult for 2 years. And now when I come back to advocacy, my attitude is different. I'm making an effort to reach out to people on a personal basis so that if I ever go through something like this again and have to take a step back from advocacy, I still have individuals that I can reach out to. Mm-hmm. How important do you think that is for us to have, you know, we have a large world of PKU connections, of rare disease connections that we can reach out to in social media, but we also need help in our lives and our management of this lifestyle, mm-hmm. and how we either, if we live with PKU or we're caring for someone who has PKU, we need, or any other rare disease, we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. I know that you think that's important, but what I want to hear from you is, how do you take care of yourself, and how do you try to keep going when it's really, really difficult, not just living with the rare disease and being affected by it, but being involved in advocacy and trying to make a difference?
I think for me, you know, acknowledgement of the trauma was hugely important. I think so many mothers put their heads down and they just keep going. And to acknowledge that piece of, you know, that sadness that came with the diagnosis and that sense of helplessness, and it really gets you to engage with then your self-care a whole lot more. So that traumatic experience, you know, really gets you to acknowledge how you are and to consider things that directly affect you. It gets you to think about your behavior and how you can manage your own behavior and your response to other people. And for me, part of my self-care regime is very much, like I said previously, is asking myself in the moment, how am I feeling right now? You know, staying with that feeling, understanding that feeling possibly came from a trigger. So what triggered me? What what's affecting me right now in that moment? Triggers, also staying in my own lane. Boundaries, hugely important. It's hard at times to see your child with PKU face certain challenges, and staying in your lane is hugely important. It really helps to support your child. It helps to support you a whole lot more. What I mean by that is, you know, being there for them, letting them know that you love them, and being a good listener, but actually letting them navigate that space for themselves.
I'm really glad you brought up this point about trauma and in the rare disease life. That's something I've been thinking about and exploring a lot in the last year. And that's because as I've traveled across the U.S. and interviewed many parents of children with PKU, we would always talk about their newborn screening story. Mm-hmm. And every single time, every single parent got emotional. And for some of them, they couldn't talk about it, you know. And if they could talk about it, They were very emotional. And people who aren't normally outwardly emotional, people who normally in any other context might appear to be very self-controlled, stoic even, these parents have gone through something that is a trauma. Getting the newborn screening call is something those parents will remember for the rest of their lives. They knew life before and it was a certain way. They were expecting life to be a certain way after their child was born, and that just changed. Everything changed. Their entire vision for life changed. Their outlook on life changed. Their mission in life changed. And so going forward, they have to understand and process a new life. And all of that is just related to how people process trauma. And the more I've realized that, the more I've understood that I think it's something that we're beginning to talk about in our community, but we're still not talking about it enough. I'm not saying that every parent just needs to go around and publicly talk about that with it. I'm not saying that we need to just talk about it like that, but people definitely need to have support systems in place so they can go privately and get help, whether that's professional help or whether that's the clinic recognizing that these problems exist, that trauma does exist in this community, and that there is more to just managing PKU than tracking blood levels.
Absolutely, yeah.
So my question to you then is, why do you think that this topic needs to be addressed so dearly in our community, and not just the PK community, but anyone that's affected by a rare disease lives with this?
Because it directly affects the management of the condition. And I think there's a huge failure to recognize that. So just when a child is diagnosed, at that point of diagnosis, parents really need that psychological support. They need their community when the time is right. So I know for me, and upon my child's diagnosis, I did not want to engage with the community. I wanted to come to terms with the condition myself before I met people and I possibly heard any bad stories that I couldn't cope with. And I think the psychological support is a huge part of management, because if the parent is in a good place, and particularly mothers, research has shown about high anxiety levels. Anxiety then leads on to the child, and it affects their ability possibly to cope with the condition as well. As parents, we don't recognize that. That anxiety can lead us to making decisions, that we would prioritize for that child that mightn't necessarily be the priority of the child, but it helps to support us. Something like the controllables. I talk about the controllables a lot. And it was interesting even hearing a mom speak yesterday in the parents group here at the conference, and she talked about, her concerns in this questionnaire around what the PKU community wanted evolved around brain scans or, Phe levels. And whereas her son who had PKU, his concerns were very much around his quality of life measures, because that's what was important to him. But what helped to support the mom was knowing that he would be okay. And it really gets me to realize, of course, moms want to protect their children, but we need to find coping mechanisms to help to protect ourselves in that space too. And they really need to be integrated very early on. And that, like I spoke about earlier, that self-awareness of how you're feeling is hugely important. For many of us, we're in denial. We think we can cope perfectly fine because we're managing the condition, right? We're doing the blood levels. We don't squirm at the sight of blood, and we've got this. We can cook, we can measure, we can shop and get the right ingredients. But then at the end of the day, who's minding us? So I think moms of kids with PKU, I'm a huge advocate for them too. And I think about Mary Jones. We're in Birmingham. She was our first advocate. And moms are very emotionally driven, and we can achieve great things, but only if we ourselves are in a good place and we can work together. And the research has even demonstrated that at home, the moms are doing a lot of the caring in the rare disease community. And a huge part of rare disease should be, and management should be, looking after those moms. It should start there too.
Thanks so much for going with me on this journey. This exploration of life, mental health, and rare disease. If you'd like to connect with me outside of this show, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. That info is in the show notes. And there's my blog, pkujournal.com. I write about my life with PKU, my experiences in advocacy, and you'll also find some of my videos there. Thank you again for listening, and now some closing thoughts. This year's ESPKU conference may be over, but I'll be thinking about it for a long time. I needed this experience. I've shared on this show how I burned out on advocacy. I spent 2 years away from this community, and ever since I came back to this world in the summer of 2022, I've struggled to find my way again. If you've never gone through an experience in life when you've lost hope, I hope you never do, because certain experiences in life change you forever. I cut myself off from my community, and I isolated myself in my pain. But as I've said before on this podcast, when we isolate ourselves in our pain, we slowly die. We don't realize it at first, but eventually we wake up and realize that the spark we used to have, the joy for living, is gone. I fought a battle for hope, and eventually, hope won. But that experience changed me forever. In my struggle, I realized that the only way to find hope, real, meaningful hope, is by confronting your pain. And that's what I've been doing here on this podcast in many of my stories. So now, this is who I am. I am in a different stage of life and have a different focus in my PKU newborn screening and rare disease advocacy. I am examining both sides of life, the beauty and the pain, and reflecting on how this rare disease life can have an impact on your mental health. Life can be hard. And when you go through experiences in life that change you forever, it can be incredibly isolating. But when we reach out and engage in community and connect with other people as humans, it can change your life. And this conference in Birmingham, it changed me forever. As I spoke with others at the event, and we shared our hearts and minds with each other, and realized just how similar we all are because of PKU. No matter where we're from, it gave me hope. I've been wandering for a long, long time, but I finally feel at peace with who I am, and I accept my rare disease life because of all of you. You amazing, beautiful people who are our global PKU community. You give me hope, and you encourage me to never, never, never give up.